Thanks, Josh. Good morning, everyone. You see that even gave me a shirt. We've been around here for so long. It's always a privilege for me to come and talk to you about the state of the bay. It's one of the most it's one of my best projects. I've been doing it for a long time, and I keep coming back because I am really passionate about Saldanha Bay, the health of the bay, and I keep learning new things every year, and I try and share those with you when I come, Kenneth. Uh, is this don't change slides for me? Yes, I'll push through, but again, just to remind you, what is the state of the bay about? It's an annual assessment of the anthropogenic impacts to and ecological health of Saldanha Bay and Mangaban Lagoon. When I talk about anthropogenic impacts, I'm talking about activities and discharges that affect the ecological health of the bay, sewage, ballast water, development, all sorts of things there. And then in terms of health, we're talking about physical health and ecological health. Physical health is things like water quality, sediment quality, currents, waves, groundwater inflow, those physical parameters that influence the biota in the bay, and also concentrations of contaminants in the bay that are introduced by human activity. So through sewage, through ballast water, through industrial discharges, that accumulate in the water, in the sediments, and in the living organisms in the bay. And that the ecological health part is about what we see, how living communities in the bay change, how their abundance changes, how their biomass changes, and their relative abundance, different mix of different species changes over time. And that's over a wide range of species from plants, invertebrates, fish, birds, and mammals. Yes, we'll think about we look at a lot of different indicators because they respond in different times, time periods, on different scales. Water quality, if you dump some effluent or some contaminant into the water, it mixes in very quickly and you'll soon it disappears very quickly. So it's an almost a very short term response time, it's instantaneous responses. Some of the effluent and some of the contaminants that get dumped to the water find their way to the sediments. Takes a little while, so you get a longer response time there. Then the living organisms start to take up those contaminants or they respond to the contaminants. Maybe they die, maybe they move away. So their response times are even longer. And the longer lived organisms are, the longer it takes to see a response in that particular group of organisms. So small things like the macrofauna, the little bugs that live in the sediment, respond quite quickly at the months, the years. Bigger things like fish, longer lived, so they take longer to respond, months or years. And then things like birds, which live for 20, 30 years, you may only see responses in decades because of their breeding success being reduced or not. So it's very useful to track that full range of different organisms to be able to see how things change over time. Lots of different components. The State of the Bay reports. We start at the top there with the live brief summary on the activities and discharges that are affecting the health of the bay. What are the developing pressures that are changing things here? We usually include a chapter on groundwater, thanks to our colleagues from GEOS, Aquila, and your colleagues. I'm not going to touch on groundwater today because I think Aquila has given us a really, really nice presentation on that. I will touch briefly on marine water quality. What are we seeing? What changes have we seen there in the last year and over the last few decades? Sediment quality is important. I will touch on that. Coastal erosion is something that's hugely important here in Saldanha Bay. I did talk at length on that last year, so I'm just going to touch briefly on that this year. Aquatic macrophytes, that's a fancy term for plants. There are a range of different plants that are associated with water, like the marine, on the perimeter of the lagoon that are very important here, and I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about that. Soft bottom benthic macrofauna, those are the little bugs that live in the sediment. Mostly you don't ever see them, but they're very useful indicator of sediment quality and changes in the health of the bay. So we always spend a bit of time looking at those. This year is something fairly new that we've introduced to the State of the Bay monitoring, and that's economically important invertebrates. And we're looking at those every 2 years, and that's specifically abalone, Polemon, and rock lobster, because Those are specifically important species for both recreational and commercial fisheries. And we just know how those are changing in the bay. Fish are obviously important. They're important for recreational commercial fisheries. Well, some people actually like fish too. But seabirds and shorebirds, Saldanha and Langebaan are amongst the most important sites in South Africa or in Southern Africa for seabirds and shorebirds. So I will definitely touch on that. Marine mammals, seals, whales, dolphins are many people's favorites. And then marine alien species, not my favorite, but an important element of the health of the bay that we need to talk about. These little spidey faces, you'll see them all over my presentation. They speak to the changes in the health of the different indicators that we look at from natural, basically hasn't changed from 100 years ago, through to poor. This is a bad situation and really needs urgent attention to try and fix it. And then between that, there is good and fair. So keep an eye out for those smiley faces. They tell you about how those indicators are changing and what we think about it. Before I go any further, a huge thank you to the people that make the work that we do possible. These are all the sponsors. These are the people that put up the cash through the trust to be able to cover the costs of the monitoring work that we do and presenting that data to you. These people are also very important because they collect data and kindly share it with us so that we can include it in the State of the Bay report, so that it gives us a more holistic picture than we would be able to do all on our own with the funding that the trust has available. So lots of people, government agencies, private sector, provincial, local, national government, who are contributing data or who are running monitoring programs in the Bay, share that with us and then we share it with you. So again, thank you very much to those people. I always have a theme or something area that I particularly want to focus on every year. And this year, I'm going to talk to you in detail a bit about the seabirds and the shorebirds of the bay, what's happening there, why they're important, why we care about them. Okay, so just starting off at the beginning, activities and discharges that are affecting the health of the bay. You will have heard from my colleague from the municipality that they have great visions for the development of Saldanha Bay and Langebaan. And with great vision becomes great pressure on the health of the bay. These are the activity. People have an impact on the environment. I am not anti-development. I'm just pro-environment. And it's fine to have development. You just need to develop in a responsible and environmentally friendly manner. So we have a chapter in the State of the Bay report that looks at trends in the various development pressures in the bay, and some of them are up on the left-hand side. We put that in red, nasty, don't like that. Some of them are down, better for the environment, but maybe not better for the economy of the region. So starting on the left-hand side, population pressure. There are people migrating into Saldanha Bay, Langebaan all the time. People are breeding and population is increased. There, with the population increases comes increased residential development, which means loss of natural environment, increased stormwater runoff, which means more contaminants going into the sea. You've got some of our oil exports, specifically manganese, have gone up in the last year. Shipping traffic, more vessels visiting the bay, going up in lots of new projects. You heard from the municipality now, green hydrogen is a huge focus for the IDZ, huge focus for the Saldanha area. Unfortunately, green hydrogen needs lots of fresh water, which we have very little of here. So where that comes from is through desalination. And with desalination, we need to get rid of brine, concentrated salt water, and that typically goes into the sea. So we need to manage that and make sure it goes into the sea in a way that doesn't necessarily impact on the environment. LNG, LPG, liquid petroleum gas, liquefied natural gas. This is an important point for introduction of those materials into this country. We need that, and we just need to make sure that how that is managed in a friendly way. Ship repair is a big thing here. In water hull cleaning, that's the cleaning of the hulls of vessels. Shipping is the most important vector for the introduction of marine alien species to this country. Needs to be carefully managed. And phosphate ore mining, you heard from Mark now, phosphate is going up. They're exporting phosphate from the port. It's not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's done carefully. Some of the things that are down, visitor numbers, tourists coming to West Coast National Park are a little bit down from previous estimates. To me, that's actually concerning because they are my friends. The visitors, the tourists that come here, they come here because of the beautiful environment. They're the ones that demand a good environment. And I read somewhere, I don't quote me, but I read a figure of 27% of the economic activity in this area comes from tourism. So tourists are hugely important to anyone who lives here. They bring in a lot of money. They promote the economy of the beach. Ballast water discharges are down, surprisingly. Um, Everyone from the wastewater treatment works, Aldana wastewater treatment works, Langebaan wastewater treatment works, is down in spite of rising population here. It seems that much of that water is now being diverted elsewhere other than going to the sea. It's going to irrigating sports field. It's going to Helensfontein mine. It's not going to Helensfontein mine. It's going to other industries are using that treated wastewater for their activities, which is great because it means it doesn't go into the sea. Ore exports, many of the ore exports are actually down. I think it's just a global downturn in global demand for some of those ores. And unfortunately, mariculture production is also down as well. And I say unfortunately because it's important. It's an important job created. It's important industry in this area. It's not development industry is not necessarily bad as long as it's done in the responsible manner. So on balance, I think we pretty much previously we've often seen development boys pushing forward and putting more pressure on the environment, but actually at the moment I think we're pretty much on balance where we are our progress in terms of managing impacts from industry is actually on balance with the rate of growth. Normally we're on the back foot trying to catch up all the time. I think we actually do quite well at the moment. It's encouraging. Um, So the next thing I wanted to talk about was water quality in the bay. We invest a huge amount of effort on measuring, monitoring water quality because water quality is important for all life. Everything depends on good water quality. Um, and we've got some amazing data sets from Saldanha Bay on water quality and how tracking change in water quality. The top one there is water temperature. We've been measuring temperatures in Small Bay for the last 15 years. I think we've got a really, really amazing data set that tells us what's happening in the bay. I don't want to go into the subtle variations there. There's strong seasonal variations in water temperature. Minor is I can spend the whole day just talking about water temperature, and it provides us great insights into how the situation in the bay is changing, how it's responding to different changes in weather, and it's an enormously valuable data set. The one below that speaks to salinity measured at the top of Langebaan Lagoon. And that's thanks to Mark and his friends. Helensfontein Mine has been sponsoring us to monitor salinity at the head of the lagoon for the last 5 years or so. We started that program because of the concern around reduced groundwater outflow to the lagoon. The municipality, Hopefield Wellfield, the Langebaanweg Wellfield that the municipality is using to meet their water demands has the potential, any abstraction of groundwater has the potential to reduce groundwater levels and hence groundwater outflow to the lagoon. At the head of the lagoon, we see salinity varies. In summer, it's likely higher than normal seawater. Normal seawater is about 35 grams of salt per liter. In summer, that level rises to about 40 milligrams per liter. And in winter, drops down to about 25, 30. So it's slightly less salty than the sea in winter, and it's slightly more salty than the sea in summer. But what keeps the lagoon from going completely hypersaline or above 40 parts per thousand is that groundwater outflow. The lagoon is shallow, it's warm, and warms up by the sun. There's a lot of evaporation, and the salt is concentrated there. And if we didn't have fresh water flowing into the head of the lagoon from the groundwater resource, it could become too salty for anything to survive there. You wouldn't get any fish, wouldn't get any birds, wouldn't get any plants in the lagoon in the absence of that groundwater inflow. It's enormously important. So that's why we are monitoring that. I noticed with great interest on the Kilo slide, she showed us seasonal variations in water level in one of the aquifers, sorry, in one of the boreholes at the head of the lagoon. We see exactly that picture in the salinity, which shows there's a very tight linkage between groundwater outflow and salinity in the lagoon. Groundwater is playing an enormously important role of preventing salinity to rising too high. The last little frame on this picture, it's oxygen levels in Big Bay and Small Bay. The Agriculture Development Zone, Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, DFFE, are monitoring oxygen levels in the bay as part of their obligation for the management of the Agriculture Development Zone. And through that, we're getting some really neat insights into variations of oxygen levels in the bay. We know that naturally the bottom borders of the bay are quite low in oxygen, and it's driven by process of upwelling, where deep water from the deep ocean is pulled into the bay as the surface waters get blown offshore. That water is very low in oxygen. As it comes into the bay, it mixes with the surface water. Oxygen levels improve. And what we're seeing from that picture is there's a strong seasonal side to those oxygen levels, and that Small Bay has much lower oxygen levels than Big Bay, and that is linked to higher the aquaculture production intensity in Small Bay is much higher than Big Bay, and that is also using up some of the oxygen. So what we were able to recognize that from that is that the carrying capacity of Small Bay is pretty much being reached in terms of how much aquaculture production we can put in there, and that you need to expand that production to Big Bay into Outer Bay. You can't basically put any more mussels and oysters into Small Bay without doing ecological damage. But that's the value of the work that the trust is doing and other people are doing. It helps us to understand. It enables us to understand what the limits of carrying capacity are and what we need to do to remain within those limits. Fecal coliforms is something that the trust started monitoring back in 1999. These are bacterial indicators of fecal pollution. Try this, yes. They are monitoring at around 20 sites around the perimeter of the bay. In fact, if I put the picture up there, there's a little map there. This is a map of Saldanha Bay there, Langebaan Lagoon. There's a whole of the sites in Small Bay around the perimeter of Small Bay over there, the first 10 sites. There's a couple of sites in Big Bay over there in the middle, and then Langebaan Lagoon at the bottom there. And the trust go out every month or sometimes every 2 weeks and go collect water samples, send them to the lab to be analyzed to check that the levels of bacterial indicators are low enough to be safe to swim, that there's no risk from swimming in that water or contracting a disease. And unfortunately, it's not always so great. This chart is graded from blue, which is excellent water quality, no risk of catching a disease swimming there. Good, it's still safe to swim there. Fair, the orange stuff, it's not so great. And poor, I wouldn't swim. And this is 1999 over here, 2035 on the end there. And you can see immediately that water quality conditions in the bay have improved dramatically over those 26, 27 years of that data. If you focus on the last column here, which is 2025, it's actually one of the best years on record, which is really, really neat. And I think thanks to the effort, the money that the municipality has invested in the Saldanha Bay wastewater treatment works, the Langebaan wastewater treatment works in terms of upgrading their capacity and improving their processing capacity and efficiency, that conditions have improved dramatically. In fact, Small Bay is probably the best it's ever been. There's one site that's still not very happy, and that's the Bob River mouth. That is the point where effort from the Saldanha wastewater treatment works flows into Small Bay. It's probably we're never going to get that much better than it is at the moment, but all of the other sites in Small Bay, including Richards Bay, Pepper Bay, are excellent. It's really, really good news. Big Bay is pretty good too. There's only one site there that's in fair condition at Lietjies Klip towards Langebaan side. I'm not worried about Langebaan though. This is arguably the worst on record. There's one site that's rated as poor, which is Langebaan Main Beach. That's where everyone goes swimming. Oosterwal is even in the lagoon, is even rated as fair. I think that is probably linked to stormwater flows from the roads, the gardens, development in Langebaan flowing off down directly into the lagoon. I think some effort needs to go into better managing that stormwater. I don't think it's sticky. Probably parking related to the Langebaan Wasteland treatment works, which discharges north of Langebaan on the northern edge of Langebaan Beach. Probably more important is the roads, the stormwater runoff that's running off the roads, informal sessions directly into the lagoon. It's not good. Trace metals in mussels. So it's very difficult to measure trace metal concentrations directly in the water. It's usually very, very low concentration, and it's very hard. Our analytical equipment struggles to detect those trace metals. But what happens is the mussels on the shoreline tend to take up those trace metals, and they concentrate, they accumulate them in their flesh, and the concentration rises to level we can easily measure. So they're a great way of measuring it, measuring to see how things are changing. Complicated graph. There are 6 different metals that we'll be monitoring over time. This is zinc in the top left-hand corner, cadmium, lead, iron, manganese, copper. And there are 5 sites in Small Bay. That's a little map of Small Bay there. Those are the 5 sites there. And this is the trend over time over the last 5 years. I'm very pleased to say that most of these are showing a downward trend. In other words, things are improving. Have a look at zinc there. It's going down. I'm going to focus on the metal ores that are exported from the bay. So these ones are the ones that are being loaded onto ships, carted out of the bay. And these are almost all on the way down. Zinc is on the way down. Lead is coming up quite nice the last couple of years. Iron has come down nicely. Copper is coming down. The Transnet and the various operators operating out of the multipurpose terminal and the iron ore terminal have made huge efforts to try and reduce spillage, to try and reduce dust. They've cut most of the ores now of certainly for lead, zinc, copper is exported in closed containers rather than just running out of a conveyor belt. The iron ore still goes on the conveyor belt, but the belt is not covered. They wet the iron ore stockpiles. So yes, maybe your houses are still more orange, but there's definitely less iron ore coming into a day now than was in the case in the past. And the only one that really bucks this trend is the manganese. You can see that levels of manganese in the last few years have come up. I started exporting manganese from the bay about 5 years ago, and there is obviously some spillage, some dust finding its way into the bay. It's not at levels that we need to be concerned about. The manganese is quite inert stuff, it's not very toxic, but it's just something to keep an eye on. I have heard via the grapevine that they are considering exporting the manganese in closed containers in a similar way that they handle the lead now, which is encouraging. But the only reason that this is coming down is because of the pressure that has been brought to bear through the work of the trust and understanding what's going on and understanding how things are changing and recognize there is a problem. If you don't recognize the problem, you deal with the problem. Trace metals in farmed mussels and oysters, farmed mussels in the top left, farmed oysters on the bottom right, and pictures very much the same. Nice downward trend over the last few years, which suggests conditions are improving. Things are getting better. It's because of improved management. So thank you, Transnet and their operators for doing that. Sediment quality, also a very interesting picture. We look at several aspects of sediment quality, one of which is sediment particle size and the mix of different grain sizes in the sediment in the bay. So we distinguish the very fine material, which is mud. So we intermediate stuff, sand, what you typically find on the beach, and the very coarse stuff, gravel. And the relative makeup of the sediment of mud, sand, and gravel is very important because mud is very fine grade, tends to pack very tightly, so your water is able to percolate through the sediment, so it means reduced oxygenation. Fine sediment also tends to pick up more trace metals and contaminants than does coarse sediment. So typically we find that fine sediment is bad and that medium and coarse sediment is much better. What we know about the Bark Saldanha Bay is back in the 1970s, before the construction of the iron ore terminal and that causeway linking the Marcus Island to the mainland, that most of the sediment in the bay was comprised of sand. 99.9% was sand, probably a little bit of gravel. There was negligible amounts of mud in the sediments in the bay. And that is reflected by, you actually can't even see it on the edge of these graphs. This is Small Bay over here. This is Big Bay over here in 1974. This is the percentage mud in the bay. So it goes from 0 to 40% there, 0 to 30% there. And there was basically no mud in the sediments of the bay back there. With the development of the ore terminal and the causeway linking Marcus Island to the mainland, and the dredging that went into constructing the berths and dredging that dredge channel into the harbor, resulted in an enormous increase in the amount of fine sediment in the bay. That's partly because the bay is underlain by this layer of calcrete. It's like chalky rock, and when you dredge that, it turns to powder. The powder goes up into the water column and then eventually settles on the bottom of the bay. So that's what you can see there in the around 2000, both in Big Bay and in Small Bay. Levels of mud reached very, very high levels, around up to 30-40% in Small Bay and around 25-30% in Big Bay. Very, very high, really unsuitable for the little bugs that live in the sediment, that the fish feed on, that the birds feed on. So basically that led to a massive decline in the health of the bay. But since 2000, going forward towards the present day, you can see how nicely that level of mud has come down. Amazing trend over the last 20 years of improvements in the health of the bay, improvement in the sediment quality of the bay. These graphs over here just show what's happened over the last 2 years. You look at sediment quality every 2 years now. And if you look the scale on this, each of these is a map of the bay. The top here is the amount of mud in the bay, the top two graphs. On the left-hand side is 2023. On the right-hand side is 2025. The darker the color, the more mud in the sediment, the greater the percentage of mud in the sediment. And you can see quite dramatic lightening of the color between the left-hand side and the right-hand side. A little graph in the middle there, color ramp, shows from blue where there's a reduction to red where there's an increase, and that graph is mostly blue. So showing amount of mud in the bay the last 2 years has gone down by about 10% of the blue, which is again a very positive trend. And it's the sand, the trend in sand, which is the middle band, is exactly the opposite. The color has gone from light yellow to a much darker yellow, suggesting that the relative proportion of sand has gone up. It's positive. And you can see that by the change and increase. The red little graph in the middle there, red color indicates the proportion of sand has gone up. Positive sign, not much change in gravel, which is the bottom panel. So yes, there's an amazing positive trend over the last 20 years, and it's really exemplified in the last 2 years. Very positive, really great improvement in the health of the bay. We haven't had any major dredging events in the bay since 2009, 2006. There have been a number of small dredging events, but they've been sufficient that they haven't had a major impact on sediment quality in the bay. What happens with that fine sediment, as I explained, you dredge the calcrete, you dredge all that sediment up, fine sediment goes up into suspension in the water column, and then over the next days, weeks, months, settles out on the bottom. And that's what we read with the high levels. But over time, wave action resuspends that fine sediment and carries it out of the bay. So there's water circulation in the bay. The water turns over all the time. As the southeast blows, the surface water is blown out of the bay and fresh bottom water comes in. And it carries that fine sediment with it. So it takes a long time. You can see it's taken 20 years to get to where we are now. But we can reverse that very quickly with one massive dredging event. I'm very scared about some of the pictures I see about proposed port development, because that means there's going to be a lot more dredging coming with those big developments. And that will have a significant impact on sediment, but and that has knock-on effects everything else. The fish, the birds, the mammals, the plants. Trace metals, also similar picture here. You see smiley faces on the blue smiley faces on the left hand side here. Most of the trace metals in the sediments in the bay have gone down over time, and certainly in the last 2 years, because of that reduction in the fine sediment spine material in the sediments in the bay. A slight increase in one or two of the metals, but that increase is almost negligible relative to the overall reduction. For back in 2010, we had extremely high levels of trace metals in the sediments in the bay, and that come down dramatically over the years. Very nice positive story. Coastal erosion, not such a great story. It's one of the most significant threats to coastal property and infrastructure around the world. Approximately 3 billion people, or half the world population, live within 200 kilometers of the coastline. And coastal erosion is an enormous problem in Saldanha Bay. Many of you, if you live here, you know the beaches in Langebaan were eroding quite badly a few years ago. Maybe not so bad now. And if you right here at Mykonos, you can see Spiavala section of beach between Mykonos and the iron ore terminal is under serious threat. You've seen losses of 100 meters of beach in places since the 1960s. And in some places, up to 40 meters of shoreline have been lost in just one decade. The main drivers of coastal erosion are climate change, climate variability, increased wave action, increased storm intensity, and inappropriate development in the coastal zone. And that includes port development, dredging, piers, groins, that sort of thing, that changes the way that waves hit the shoreline and results in loss of sediment from the shore. I did talk a lot about coastal erosion last year, so I'm going to be very brief here. We had done some work, my colleagues have done some work on coastal vulnerability in Langebaan and Saldanha Bay to try and understand how significant is this threat for coastal erosion. And they looked at, I think it's almost every 100 meters along the shoreline. What is the relative vulnerability to coastal erosion? Very low risk is in blue, low, moderate in green, yellow high, red very high. And you can see there's one very hot spot over there opposite Langebaan town, just north of the first groin, that is at very high risk for coastal erosion. And the rest seems to be okay. Quite a bit of accretion going on here, where accretion means the beach is growing, and that's thanks to the groin that was put in place there about 5 years. These graphs just show the trajectory of the shoreline. There, shoreline growing because of the groin that's put in place over here. This is that erosion hotspot over here, and then the rest is kind of in the little change over time. I was quite surprised by this. Paradise Beach, this is Mykonos where we are over here, iron ore terminal over there. This is all rated as fairly low vulnerability to coastal erosion. Although if you do go and walk on that beach, have a look at the beach, you can see the dunes falling into the water. All of the rocks are now exposed on that beach. When I first came to Saldanha 25 years ago, or even longer, 30 years ago, when I started working here, that was sandy beach from one end to the other, and it's now mostly rocky shore. The reason that the vulnerability seems to be low is because the rock, the concrete, that rock that's underlying the shoreline there isn't retreating. So the sand that was on top of it has been taken away, but the rock is resistant to erosion, so it's not actually retreating. But you are seeing the dunes falling into the shore. That dune edge is becoming very, very steep, and given enough time, that is going to start to retreat. I think that maybe the risk is not as great. The risk is greater than maybe exemplified by that graph. And yes, you go down to the beach off here, this is what you see. This is trying to retain you all, because it's Mykonos trying to protect these houses that are lying on the shoreline just about the street. So while it may appear as the shoreline is not from a vulnerable perspective, it is actually a serious problem. This is just a close-up focus on the two groins here at Langebaan Beach. There's Scarpton Island, Langebaan Town here. The first groin basically lies under that little mound of sand over there. The second one lies over there. And this is the change in the position of the shoreline over time. That's what the lines there say. Blue is 2015, red is 2025. And you can see there it starts with the blue right on the inner edge, and red is out here now. So basically, the shoreline is moving outwards away from the land, and there's low coastal vulnerability there. That's all thanks to the groin that was built over there, which is allowing sand to build up on the downstream side of this. This groin over here wasn't as successful. It's subject to much more intense wave action. That groin is now starting to erode, and it's also because of the way this groin is focusing waves on the beach, is now quite serious erosion there. So back in 2015, the coastline was out there, and now 2025, the coastline is here for coastage. Whoever lives over here. Pretty soon, you're going to have not only beachfront property, but underwater properties. The trajectory of the shoreline, you can see there, changing the shoreline over time. Over here is growing outwards, very nice. But here, strong seasonal pattern. In winter, it erodes. In summer, it grows back out again. So it kind of goes up and down, up and down, up and down. But it's gradually going down. It's going down more each time, or eroding more each year, and it is growing. So it is a real so there's massive risk to property in that area, and you can no longer just rely on the fact that the groins were built 5 years ago and that they can be sorted out. They aren't. The groins have lived their life. They need to be maintained. They need to be rebuilt. They need to be bigger. There needs to be active nourishment of that beach if you want to protect those properties. Aquatic macrophytes. I'm just going to get a drink of water. Aquatic macrophytes is just a fancy word for plants, and but they are aquatic plants. They're plants that are strongly associated with the water. In Langebaan, we've got 3 basic types of macrophytes. There's seagrass. It's the stuff that grows below the high water mark, that grows in the water, below the surface of the water, and they're salt tolerant. And then there are something called salt marsh that tends to grow in the intertidal, so it's submerged high tide, exposed at low tide. They're funny little fleshy plants. They're called salt marsh, and you can easily recognize them at the head of Langebaan Lagoon and along the beaches around the edge of the lagoon. And then further up the shore, you've got reeds and sedges, tend to grow quite tall, quite bushy things, and they look like that. There's basically two species of those 6 around the edge of the lagoon. These plants are very important. They provide huge range of ecosystem services, from coastal protection. They stop shore from eroding. They're great for fish nursery areas. They're great for birds. They're great for invertebrates. They're great for climate regulation. They store carbon. They prevent ocean acidification. They control diseases. They improve water quality. They stabilize sediments. They really use the things. And that's something that we should really look after. And what we've been doing over the last few years is trying to map the change in these plant communities around the Asian lagoon. It's very hard work if you go out in the field and you measure it by hand. So we like to do that using satellite imagery, satellite photographs. We can use that to map how from year to year we can look at the change in the distribution of these plants. And this is seagrass. That's the stuff that occurs on the sandbanks, or eelgrass, or zostra. It grows below the high water mark. And this is what we've got good satellite imagery since 2015 towards the present day. And this is annual change in abundance or extent of seagrass in the lagoon. This just shows you the red color. Red green just shows how it's changed over time. But the most important thing is that net reduction of time. That's quite concerning. The amount of eelgrass is going down quite dramatic. I don't know exactly what's causing that. Trying to understand that. It may be increased water, maybe because the amount of fine material in the sediment has gone down. We don't know exactly right now. It may be changes in water quality, maybe too much nutrient, too little nutrients, too much salt, too little salt. We don't know, but it is a concerning trend. and something that we do need to get a handle on. The other plants that I spoke about, our soapbark plants, those are the ones that occur in the intertidal scribum, they're actually increasing. They've increased ever so slightly over the last 10 years. So that's, I guess, encouraging. You can see there where the green and the blue are kind of overlaying each other. So there's very little change over top. It's quite stable. The reeds and sedges, those are the ones who are going further up the shore. They are enormously, groundwater is enormously important for these things. These things need to grow with their feet in fresh water. So their roots need to go down into the fresh groundwater aquifer. And there's some change from year to year, but there's no trend, there's no decline, there's no increase. So we're quite comfortable with it. But as I said, seagrass, you're a little bit concerned about that. Don't quite know what's going on there. But we do think that it's important to get a handle on. Is that it's something that we are doing wrong, we need to stop. Because otherwise we're going to lose all our seagulls. And along with it, the birds, the fish, anything else that depends on seagrass. Okay, next up is benthic macrofauna. These are the bugs that live in the sediment. They make little burrows or like burrow between the sand grains, the sediment, worms and isopods and amphipods. That are interesting names there. This is a graph shows you trend over time since 1999 when we first started looking at macrofauna in the sediments in Saldanha Bay and Langebaan Lagoon intensively. This is trained over time, just to the number of species. So usually in a healthy ecosystem, you've got lots of species, and a polluted, unhealthy ecosystem, you've got a low number of species. And Small Bay on the left, Langebaan Lagoon on the right, Big Bay in the bottom corner there. And what I can see there, there's a lot of variability from year to year, but there's basically an ongoing decline in the number of invertebrate species in Small Bay. Not a good picture. Langebaan Lagoon is pretty much the reverse, seems to be an increase over time, which is to me positive. Big Bay, very strong increase over time. So to me, what I'm reading from that is the health of the sediment across the bay has improved, and in Big Bay we can see a very nice response in that in the biological, the biota. Langebaan Lagoon similar, not such marked response, but in Langebaan in Small Bay, in spite of the improvement in sediment health, the fauna is still declining. So there's other pressures. Maybe there's the changes in water quality, maybe more subtle changes that we're not able to pick up that is causing the community there to decline. So kind of a mixed message there. Small Bay is struggling, Big Bay is doing well. Langebaan Lagoon is doing well. So on balance, we're doing well. This is shows you a trend over time in the numbers of bugs in the sediment. Again, Small Bay. So this is abundance. This is numbers of organisms. The three graphs on the left-hand side. The three graphs in the middle is biomass. Top is Small Bay. Middle is Big Bay. Bottom is Langebaan Lagoon. And you look at those little dotted lines I put on the top there. In fact, in all instances, the trend is positive. There's an increase in the number of bugs that are living in the sediment. And at least until the last few years, there seems to have been a bit of a drop-off in some places in Small Bay, Big Bay. I don't know what's caused that change the last few years, but on balance, over the last 25 years, there's been a gradual increase over time. And I think that is linked to synthetic health. So again, for me, overall positive story. This is things are improving. We're beginning better at managing impacts and threats to the environment in Saldanha Bay. And that's positive. You need to keep that trend going. Okay, moving on. Economically important invertebrates. This is the abalone, or some people know it as pernaman, and rock lobster. Some people know it as crayfish. Abalone, they live on rocky reefs, 5 and 20 meters dense, between St. Helena Bay, which is a little bit north of us, all the way around to Port St. John's on the east coast. They feed on kelp. They reach sexual maturity after 7 years, and the minimum legal size, which is 140 millimeters slow, after 8 to 9 years. And they live up to 30 years. If you compare that to some of your domestic livestock like sheep and goats, cows and things like that, they're mature, they're full grown after a year, they're ready to breed after a year, and they probably last for 7 or 8 years. These guys, by the time your average livestock is dead, these guys are just starting to reach maturity. They incredibly grow incredibly slowly and take a long time to reach maturity. Stocks of the species are now being reduced because of overfishing to less than 1% of what they were under natural circumstances. It's a crisis. This thing is now, the abalone is now rated as an endangered species. They still allow commercial fishermen to catch this. And the poachers, of course. West Coast rock lobster occur between Namibia and Port Elizabeth. They feed on urchins, abalone, mussels, barnacles. Males reach sexual maturity at about the same time as abalone after 7 years. Females only mature after 50 years. And they live for up to 40 years. Non-surprisingly, this species is also, this is about 1.2% of natural. The stocks of this species be completely decimated due to overfishing. And they just increased the total allowed catches here for some reason. That's the trend in captures over time, over the last 30, 40 years. It's a sad situation. Both of these species occur in the bay, so this is why we wanted to just have a look and see how we're doing relative to the rest of the country. We now doing surveys across 31 different sites in Outer Bay, which is the orange color there, Small Bay, which is the blue dots, Big Bay, the green dots, and then in the entrance to Langebaan Lagoon, the purple dots. That's where even there's rocky reef in the bay. We've been doing some surveys, and we make sure that some of our surveys, or some of our areas we were surveying are inside the marine protected area. That's in Langebaan there. There's little marine protected areas around each of the islands. So we've cited some of our sites there. And they sort of, the light green patch is the aquaculture development areas or aquaculture development zone. And we've also made sure we got some sites in the aquaculture development zone, some sites outside. And this is what we managed to find from these surveys. These will be done roughly every 2 years. The top is the abalone. He looks like that. And we've compared it to some of the data we've got from, firstly, Robben Island in Cape Town, the Atlantic side of the peninsula, the West Coast side of the Cape Peninsula, the False Bay side of the Cape Peninsula. And these are the 4 areas in Saldanha Bay, Langebaan Big Bay, Langebaan Lagoon, the lagoon mouth, Small Bay, and Outer Bay. From an abalone perspective, there are not many abalone here. That's right. Yeah, there used to be a lot of abalone here. Back in the day, I used to dive there when I was a child. And I know we could get some very good abalone here, Donkergat, in the entrance to the lagoon, Small Bay. But right now, there's hardly any, certainly much less than we see at Robben Island. Robben Island is being quite well protected because it's quite a distance offshore, so it's difficult for the fishermen to get there, particularly the poachers. So there's actually a fair number of abalone left on Robben Island. False Bay is okay, but we don't have much in the way of abalone left here in Saldanha Bay, Langebaan. Rock lobster, quite an interesting story. There's again Robben Island. I don't know what happened to the rock lobster there. Atlantic side of the Cape Peninsula, modest numbers. False Bay, very low numbers. Just to bring your attention to the dark color is below the legal size, so below the size of maturity. The line color is juvenile animals, and that's the picture of False Bay or Cape Peninsula looks like. This is Big Bay. There's enormous numbers of juvenile rock lobster on the reefs in Big Bay. Quite an interesting outcome. We didn't expect that at all. But actually reasonable numbers in other parts of Saldanha Bay. So much better than the Cape Peninsula and probably better than other areas. So from a rock lobster perspective, there are actually quite a few lobsters in Saldanha Bay. And just to go back, just remember this. Remember this high number of juvenile rock lobsters in Big Bay, and go back one slide. And most of our sites in Big Bay are on this, what they call abrasion platform in the middle of the bay. So a big piece of coalbury that has been exposed by the wave action, low profile reef, it's not more than half a meter above the sediment surface. But this is where most of the juvenile rock ulcers in Saldanha Bay are hiding. So to me, when they cited the agriculture development zone here, and more specifically the finfish aquaculture zone right over there, on top of that reef area, we were very concerned. I think, to me now, this lends support to those concerns that this reef area out here is actually very, very important, and important particularly for lobster. What can I tell you about fish? This is we've been doing surveys around the perimeter of the bay. You see the little docks going around there up into the lagoon. 16 different sites we've resampled every year since 1994, and we do those surveys every year. And we've been looking at the change in the number of species that we find in each of those areas of the bay, in Small Bay, Big Bay, and Langebaan Lagoon. And the picture is very similar to the macro forwarded picture, where in Big Bay, there's a lot of variation in the number of species from year to year, but there's no real trend in time. Same as Langebaan Lagoon, some variation, but not much trend in time. But in Small Bay, is unfortunately we can see a reduction in the number of species. Remember, lots of species good, few species tends to be bad. So that's a bit of a concern for the health of Small Bay. And we know why that is. It's because the circulation in Small Bay is being greatly restricted by the iron ore terminal, the causeway linking the island to the mainland. It means that anything that is dumped in Small Bay tends to stay there because it's a sort of closed circulation. So the water quality is not as good as the rest of the bay, and that is having an impact on the fish communities in those areas. This is some information on the abundance of different species. These are the kind of 20 or so comet species we get in the bay. And the color wrap just indicates the darker the color, the more, the greater the number of that particular species we caught in that particular year. And yes, you can see them going up and down all over the place, and there's no real trend for most of those species. There are three that stand out for me. One is the sand sharks. Could see there when we started in the early mid 1990s, 2000s, dark yellow color, lots of sand sharks, and progressively fewer and fewer and fewer. And the last few years, we've actually caught none. Very sad. Else is a similar picture, but maybe not as bad. Many more darker colors here, and towards the present day, and white stump nose, very, very clear trend of dark blue greens over here, going down to yellows and light greens over here. Those three species are the ones that are commonly targeted by recreational fishers. The fishing pressure here is just too high to sustain these stocks. If we don't reduce fishing pressure, we're not going to be able to catch white stumpers. We're not going to be able to catch alfield anymore. And we're certainly not going to be able to catch the sand sharks anymore here. We do need to somehow reduce fishing pressure. The Trust had petitioned the minister just to reduce the bag limit slightly on some of these species, to reduce the bag limit for 10 to 5. You could eat 10 fish in a day. If you don't catch 10 fish, you're not going to eat a day. The minimum size for a white stump nose, I think, is 20 centimeters. You baby can a fillet of a fish lipo, suggesting that they increase the size limit to 25 centimeters, just to give this fish more of a chance so that people continue to come here to catch fish. I don't know why the sand sharks suffer so much, but we do know that they breed very slowly. They give birth to very few young, maybe 1 or 2 young per year. And they seem to be very susceptible to fishing. Very few people eat these things. But I have seen many enders thrown in the bush behind them rather than put them back to this. That's very sad. It's honest. So, but somehow think that these guys are somehow susceptible to, once being caught, probably don't survive when you put them back in the net. It's difficult to do anything about. That is a bit of a concerning picture for those species in particular. Seals. Let me like seals. Uh, Seals, there are seal colonies all the way along the South African coast from the northern Namibia, Angola, all the way around to Port Elizabeth over there. The little dots represent the seal colonies. And some of those are breeding colonies. One of the breeding colonies is here on Fordland Island. And historically, 100 years ago, there used to be monster seals breeding on Fordland Island. Uh, we uh, we were seals used to be harvested for their pelts, pet food, various things, and we managed to reduce numbers of seals quite substantially, both from harvesting, but also by taking away their food, the fish. And but recently, seal populations have started to recover. In 2006, seals first started breeding on Fordland Island again for many decades. Population increased quite quickly, up to about the next 7 or 8 years, up to about 50,000 breeding pups produced every year. And for the last 10 years, it's remained more at that level, about 15,000 pups produced there each year. And we think it's probably reached carrying capacity. In other words, they can't sustain any more seal pups there because based on the amount of food that the female adult seals are able to capture. Um, and yes, many people, as I said earlier, don't like seals because they eat fish. We like fish, and they're a nuisance. Many people for many years, many people still believe that seals are attracted to the mariculture infrastructure in Saldanha Bay, and that's why we were terming seals in the bay. They also eat seabirds, the gannets, the cormorants, the juveniles, and they flesh on the islets, so they are a nuisance. But some interesting work is being done on the seals, the female seals that breed on Fordland Island. They've tagged those seals with satellite tags so they can track where they swim, and this is where they go. This all the green lines are the ones that originated on Fordland Island, and you can see they swim all over the place outside. Will they even run to Betty's Bay? But never once did they go to Saldanha Bay. The female seals seem to, when they've got their pups, they seem to forage outside of the bay. They don't come into the bay at all. It's actually the young male seals that are the most of the property. They're the ones that are roosting on the mariculture rafts and feeding on the seabirds in the bay. It's not the female seals. Don't worry about the ones that are breeding on the island. They're okay. It's the other ones. Almost. Yeah, I want to talk a bit about marine alien species now. Um, there are around 105 alien marine species that you've been able to detect in South Africa. Alien species are ones that don't naturally occur here, be brought in from other countries or elsewhere in the world. Uh, 63 of these 105 are labeled as invasive, that their populations have sustained over multiple generations and that they've expanded beyond the point of introduction. So those are the ones that we really worry about. Doesn't matter if you bring in an alien species and it just stay put and it doesn't grow. It's the ones that start to expand and invade other areas that are a problem. In Saldanha Bay, we've got 46 alien species, so it's one of the highest counts of alien species anywhere in the country. 39 of those are invasive, so a very high proportion are invasive. We know that shipping is a major vector for introducing alien species, either through ballast water or from hull fouling, from the things that stick on the bottom of the ship, and we scrape them off and then introduce them in that way. We've been tracking 3 alien species in the bay quite closely over the last 20 years or so. The 2 of these occur on the rocky shores in the bay. One is the Mediterranean mussel, your classic black mussel. That's also the mussel that the aquaculture farmers grow on their farms. The other is a Pacific barnacle, is a little white barnacle that lives on the top of the shore. If you go down to the shore, the rocky shore in Saldanha Bay, that's pretty much all you're going to see. Because on the top of the shore, there's all these white barnacles, and the bottom of the shore is all the black mussels. They're all alien. This is very interesting. This Mediterranean mussel, we think, was introduced to South Africa in the 1980s. And from our data, we can see it rose to a peak in around 2014, 2015. And since the abundance, numbers of these mussels have gone down quite precipitously since then. And interestingly, very similar pattern with this Pacific barnacle. We think it was introduced probably around 2000. Uh, the peak numbers we're getting were about 2010, and also we're going down quite markedly across all the sites we monitored for the last 15 years. This guy is interesting. He's a pea crab. He lives in deep water in the burrows of prawns. Prawns made burrows in the sand. This guy goes and sits and lives in the burrow with them. We think he was introduced to the bay. Well, the first time we found him was in 2008. So probably somewhere between 2004, 2008, this guy came into the bay and rapidly increased up to about 2020. And now also seems to be declining a bit. Why is this happening? We speculating about this. We think maybe that typically when alien species arrive in a new place, they have no predators because they knew. So things that would normally predate on the fish or birds or whatever don't recognize them as food. So they're able to proliferate, they grow very quickly. Other important thing about alien species is they often don't arrive with their natural parasites and their natural diseases. So in the absence of those parasites, diseases, the population is able to expand very quickly. And but then we think maybe that firstly, predators just learn to recognize these things. This black mussel is so different to the other black mussels here, and they're actually good food. So the birds are now starting to eat them, the fish are starting to eat them. But we also think probably that diseases have been brought in with more shipping traffic, more ballast water, and that diseases from the local mussel species have learned to jump across these and now are starting to reduce the populations. So from our perspective, this is really good. The aliens are going down and the local species are getting a chance to take over again. Not so good for the mussel farmers who are struggling to get spec to settle on their mussel works. Previously, they relied on natural settlement, and now they're really struggling there, not actually getting enough mussels to settle on the ropes. So, yeah, very interesting story. It's nice. It's only after we get a really long data set like that, we can start to see these pictures emerging. And you might have asked me 5 years ago, why are you bothering munching these things, mussels on the shore? But I can tell you now what, because it tells an interesting story. It helps us to learn about managing alien species elsewhere, about the risks in it. We learn enormous amounts from these data sets. Oh yeah, so the last thing I want to talk to you about, I said this would be my kind of spend a bit more time on this, is seabirds and water birds. Seabirds, those are birds that are adapted to life at sea. There are about 350 of these seabird species around the world. We've got 132 in South Africa. They tend to live longer, breed later, have fewer young than other birds, and they invest a great deal of time and energy in bringing up their young because they have relatively few. Most of them nest in colonies, particularly on offshore islands. We don't have many offshore islands in South Africa. You've got 7 in Saldanha Bay. That's probably about a third of all offshore islands we have in South Africa. So Saldanha Bay is an enormously important area for seabirds because many of the country's seabirds are actually breeding on the islands in Saldanha Bay. And there's quite a few species here. I'll go through some of them. African penguins is in real trouble. It's listed as critically endangered by the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Global population, we think there's about 18,000 breeding pairs in South Africa and Namibia. And Saldanha Bay harbors about 1% of that population. The population trend we see at Saldanha Bay is very much the same as we see elsewhere in the country or elsewhere too in Namibia. Dramatic decline over the last 25 years. We've got data since 1991, so that's the last 35 years. We know that numbers of penguins were decimated from the 1960s. They eat pelagic fish, sardine and anchovy. We learned to catch sardine and anchovy in the 1960s or the 1950s. By the end of the 1960s, there were hardly any sardines left. These birds had no food. We dug all the guano off the islands because we wanted it for fertilizer, and we grabbed all the eggs. So these birds were absolutely decimated by the end of the 1980s. population. When we banned guano harvesting, we banned egg harvesting, and we reduced fish pressure on the pelagic fish populations. Their food started going up, their breeding success started going up, and we saw a nice positive trend from the 1990s up to 2000. But since 2000, you can see what's happened with these are sardine and anchovy there. Numbers of sardine and anchovy since the middle of that period have gone down precipitously. These birds are just starving to death. They don't have enough food to survive. They don't have enough food to feed their chicks. And now we're left with somewhere around 75 breeding pairs in Saldanha Bay, down to a peak of about 2,000. Free set. Cape Gannets, very similar picture here. When we stopped killing all the pelagic fish, stopped killing all their food, numbers started to increase up to the sort of 2000s. But when we started catching all the pelagic fish again, numbers have gone down quite dramatically. These guys are also affected by seals, which eat the young chicks as they leave their islands. Is a Saldanha Bay Pelican Watch that we do some really good work of chasing seals off breeding islands to try and protect these birds, to try and protect the chicks. And the work that they've done suggests that these birds were taking somewhere between the seals were taking between 30 and 80% of the young chicks as they fledged. So seals were a huge problem. Seal Watch has been doing it. So Penguin Watch, Pelican Watch has been doing great work in chasing pelicans off the islands and seals off the islands, because both of those animals predate on these seabirds. And we hope that they will be able to continue with that work, because that has probably contributed to that little bit of an uptick in the population there over the last few years. Lots of different cormorant species here. Cat cormorants, very variable in number, but also down from a peak of around 24,000 to about 770 more recently. Same thing, lack of food. These guys eat sardines and anchovy. They just aren't, there's not enough food for these guys. And also, badly affected by oil spills and other things, seals, pelicans. There's recently BirdLife South Africa compelled the Minister of Environmental Affairs to establish closed areas around our offshore islands to fishing, to pelagic fishing specifically, to try and give these birds an opportunity, at least during the breeze, to get enough food to feed their chicks. The Minister resisted vehemently for a long time in introducing that ban, but was recently compelled now. Well, he didn't introduce it, and then they wanted to take it away. It was recently compelled by a court case to actually reintroduce that ban. And now, for the next foreseeable future, there is no fishing around Dasson Island, Robben Island, Stony Point, Dye Island, St. Point, and Bird Island to try and alleviate the stress on these birds. And again, culling of problem seals in Saldanha Bay has helped, and Pelican Watch has helped to try and keep the pelicans off the islands and to keep the seals off the islands. Bank cormorants, very sad state of affairs here. These guys actually eat rock lobster. Rock lobster stocks are 1% of the natural population. These guys are the food. There were 300 breeding pairs in the islands back in the 1990s. They're now 7. Again, Pelican Watch is helping. And I said there at the bottom, the Minister's increased the total allowable catch for rock lobster this year, in spite of the fact there's only 1.3% left. Good odd. Crown cormorants, similar picture, going up in the beginning as this pelagic fish covered, and but down again from 700 and something pairs down to about 200 pair. Again, lack of food, predation by seals and gulls and pelicans. Avian flu is becoming a real problem. Avian flu comes from farming chickens. It's spread to our seabirds, and it's decimating seabird populations. All those species, this previous ones, all susceptible to avian flu. And unfortunately, not a great situation. White-breasted pulpit, exactly the same story. Avian flu, lack of food, predation by seals, gulls, pelicans. Unfortunate situation, down from 200 pairs in 1990 down to what, 32 pairs now. Oyster catchers are actually nice. Antidote to that. They have recently been upgraded from near threatened to least concerned because their numbers are actually increasing in Saldanha Bay. In fact, increasing all over the South African coastline. I think that's thanks to two things. One was the ban on off-road vehicles in the coastal zone. These don't breed on the beaches, and people used to drive over their eggs and nests, or somebody used to chase the adult birds away, and then the gulls, dogs would be able to get to the eggs and the chicks, and then they would basically eliminate any breeding successes. So national population trend is up. The other thing that's been really great for these birds is the alien mussels that have invaded the shoreline for South Africa. And these guys like eating alien mussels. And the biomass from those alien black mussels, huge amount of food for these birds has been very positive for them. So I don't know what's going to happen when mussels are now starting to go down. Maybe the birds will go down again. I really hope not, because it is, from a bird perspective, one of the most major success stories here. Saldanha Bay harbors about 5 to 10% of the global population of these birds. They only occur in Angola, Namibia, and South Africa. About 5-10% of those actually live in Saldanha Bay. The Saldanha Islands very important for these birds. The other really important group of birds in Saldanha Bay, Langebaan, or specifically Langebaan Lagoon, are water birds. These are birds that are predominantly associated with water. They include the seabirds, but most of the water birds are things like wading birds, waders, gulls and terns, kingfishers, and birds of prey. Langebaan Lagoon is arguably one of the most important, if not the most important, site for water birds anywhere in the country. The Avian Demography Unit at the University of Cape Town does annual counts of water birds in Langebaan Lagoon in summer and in winter, and they kindly share that data with us. They've been doing this since 1975 all the way through to the present day. The picture on the top there is the summer counts. And you can see they're going up to 45,000 birds per count per every summer. Winter, much lower numbers, up to about 18,000 birds each year. Most of these birds are what we call palearctic migrants. They don't breed here. They only spend part of the year here. They come to South Africa during the summertime. They come here to feed. They feed in places like Langebaan Lagoon, the Berg River Estuary, and they come the end of summer, March, April. They will fly across to the northern hemisphere to the Arctic tundra, where they will go and breed, and they will lay their eggs and raise their chicks in the northern hemisphere some. And then end of the summer they'll come back here. So unfortunately, numbers of birds in Langebaan Lagoon were up in the 40,000s back in the late 1980s or early 1980s, have gone down to about 8,000 now. That is a function of, as these birds fly between the northern and the southern hemisphere, they fly over Europe, the Middle East, and people like to hunt birds there, and they shoot them as they come past. So that is one of the most important reasons for the decline in the numbers of birds here. But also, it's disturbance and changes in conditions on the local feeding ground here in Southern Africa, because the same trend is applying to the residue waders. These guys don't go anywhere. They spend all their time here, and they've also gone down in number. These numbers, it's right across Southern Africa. This is the trade of mass of the time and the numbers of these birds. It's a very sad situation, and it's because of habitat degradation, poor water quality, pollution, changes in sediment quality, reduction in their food supply. And tell you, very interesting happened during COVID. That's where it says no data, no count due to COVID over there. But interestingly, uh, this is unfortunately we don't have winter counts for the last 3 years, so this ends in 2022. But if you look at the summer numbers, COVID was over there. COVID, when people were confined to their homes, couldn't go out, birds loved it. The birds' action, their breeding success almost doubled in that COVID period. And numbers since COVID have, well, they maintained for a little while, but they seem to be dropping off again because people are now back out there on the wetlands, disturbing their food, disturbing the birds. So, unfortunately, and hunting is one of the major things that impacts these birds. Don't know what you can do about it, but we're hoping there's a lot of pressure in Europe, the Middle East to try and reduce hunting pressure on these birds. Okay, last two slides. Development pressure is ratcheting up the bay, it ratchets up all the time. But I think thankfully, most of what we're seeing is that's not translating reduced ecological coffee. We're getting better at managing that pressure. Groundwater reserves are stable, maybe even decent because of good rainfall. Water quality of some of the vest records you've had in recent times, sediment quality has improved dramatically over the last 20 years. Coastal erosion is still a bit of a problem. Will remain a problem until we do something about it. The ecology, benthic macrofauna, actually increased over the last few years. Abra and rock lobster stocks not doing so well, but that's not because of not because of development, but because of fishing pressure. Fish populations, again, fishing pressure is affecting these. Birds breeding on the islands are declining, some score recovery post-COVID. But again, I don't think it's pressure in the bay and is causing that. Marine aliens are getting a bit more marine aliens around. We're getting better at finding them, but that's still not what's it. But on the whole, the physical indicators suggest conditions are improving and there is some good positive responses from the buyers. I think doing well, but don't take your eyes, it's the way.